My degens, if you're watching this video, it means that you pulled for Hugo. And if you pulled for Hugo, this guy may actually be the most simple of the modern characters we've had so far. Like, look at his status bar. He doesn't even have a stack or a gauge system. But, and that's a big but, just because he seems simple, it doesn't mean he's weak. And it doesn't mean that there are not any massive optimizations that we can do. But with that, let's tear off Hugo's clothes and really get inside of him. But before we go there, I do need to remind you that new players to Zenless can earn up to 70 master tapes and 70 bang brew pulls. And for returning players, of course, come check in for 7 days and you'll get 10 limited master tapes as well as 10 brew-ons. All right, let's go. So Hugo's kit is extremely straightforward. We want to first edge the enemy towards the stun. So push. We can use Lycaon, we can use Lighter, we can use whoever, and we want to get over to 100 stun. All right, and then so I'm going to stun with Lycaon, and what's going to happen after that is I'm going to take the chain attack with Hugo, and then cancel. So middle button for me, and then I'm just going to blow my load just like that. Bada bing, bada boom, big totalize. 1.9 million damage. That is huge numbers. So let me just show you guys again. I'm going to put him into stun. We're going to go Hugo, and then we're going to cancel the chain attack for me again, middle button, and then bada bing, bada boom, totalize. Oh wait, sorry, it's totalize. That's All right, and so what it really comes down to is that totalized number, that 1.9 million figure that you saw. That figure is dependent on how much of the enemy's stun gauge is left. So if I totalized when the stun gauge was like really low like this, you will see I'm going to do meager amounts of damage. My totalize was only 988k, which is a lot of damage, but it certainly is not 1.9 mil. That, my degens, is pretty much Hugo in a nutshell. More stun gauge, use EX skill, do big damage. Yeah, that's really it. And so as you can tell, we're not going to be spending very much time in Hugo at all. Now, there is going to be one thing I want to mention to you guys, and it's that whilst we're not going to be using Hugo's basic attack chain too much, there is actually one mechanism you should do. So it's 1, 2, 3, and then you want to hold 4 because it's charging, and then you want to keep holding for 5. So you can see where he does like that beam thing on the back of his head. If you do end up basic attacking for any reason, you want to hold down the basic attack to make sure that he actually does the charge and then does it again. It does more damage, it does more days, it does more energy regeneration. But coming back to it, you can see that the playstyle is very simple. It's actually quite similar to Zhu Yuan's, except like it's taken to the maximum. We want to spend all of our time in our stunners and then go into Hugo, who then will do the totalize. Yes, it's totalize. Bada bing, bada boom, 1 mil damage. Now you saw that was only 1 million. And the reason it's 1 million is because we have to manage all of these different buffs. So then I would say, okay, the general playstyle for Hugo is not just to build up and push stun and then nuke them with the totalize, but it's actually also to, whilst you're building stun, to know every single character and what they contribute towards the team. So for example, the reason why Lycaon is so good for Hugo is because he does 2 things. First, EX special attack or assist follow-up. I would just say, just use EX special attack. Think about that one. EX special attack on an enemy takes their ice damage resistance down by 25%. And the second thing is that for the additional ability, stun damage multiplier increased by 35% if Lycaon hits the stunned enemy. And so knowing these 2 facts, this actually changes our gameplay in 2 different ways. The first is that whilst we are building days to push towards the stun, we want to throw in an EX special attack at some point. We don't want to throw in too many because we want to make sure that we have more for the next rotation. As you can tell, we're going to be rotating these stun windows really fast. And the second thing is that when Lycaon hits a stunned enemy, the target's stun damage multiplier increases by 35%. What this means is that we want to actually use Lycaon to put the enemy into stun, because that will get us the stun damage multiplier increased by 35%. Now, what's going to happen is that it's not always going to go perfectly like that. You might accidentally use your Hugo or your other stunner, in this case Lighter, and they might actually push the enemy into stun. Fear not, what you need to do here though, is you need to take Lycaon first, because the chain attack does count and it will give that 35% damage multiplier. And then you take Hugo, who then will do the totalize. So then after that, let's talk Lighter, who is just freaking giga cracked. Homeboy's got 2 things you need to remember. The first is that he reduces the ice resist by 15%. And the second thing is that when he does like the aura, he stacks up to 75% extra ice damage, depending on how much impact and how like juiced up your Lighter is. So just for illustration purposes, I'm essentially saying, just do this, aura, make sure you get to the end and then do the finishing punch. And Homeboy, he has 15% ice defense down, as well as we've got our 20 stacks over here. I'm going to come over to detailed stats just to show you guys, or effect details. And you can see 20 stacks times 3.75. I don't know how much it is. My math was shit, but that is a big, huge number. All right, and so the next thing I want to talk about is when we push the enemy into stun, Hugo actually has a crit buff, a crit rate and a crit damage buff, plus 12% crit rate and plus 25% crit damage. And this is activated when we either take the chain attack or we use Hugo to actually push the enemy into stun. And so between these two options, I would say I would almost 100% of the time take the chain attack with Lycoan. Right, so boom, boom, boom. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pick Hugo. And here I'm going to cancel and then show you guys, go into effect details. We've got the crit rate and the crit damage buff. And then immediately after, we're going to totalize. Bada bing, bada boom. Big damage. And so what I'm trying to say is that there is a second way to get that buff, and it's to actually push the enemy into stun using Hugo instead of Lycoan. However, what I am going to say is I am almost always going to prefer pushing the enemy into stun using Lycoan. And the reason is because, remember, using Lycoan to push the enemy into stun gives us that extra stun damage multiplier, in which we can then just take Hugo to use his chain attack to get that big crit buff, and then go to town with the totalize after. So if we're going to do it this way, and this will probably happen, you might accidentally use Hugo to push the enemy into stun. What we need to do then is to actually take the first chain attack with Lycoan. So this is going to increase, boom, boom, boom. You see 150 up to 185%, and then take Hugo after that, and then we can use our totalize. All right, and so I'm going to use Hugo to put the enemy into stun again. The other option actually is to cancel Lycoan and swap back to Hugo, and then do totalize like that. Because if you saw what happened in the last rotation, the stun gauge was actually decreasing. We don't want that. So I'm going to push him into stun, and then I'm going to take Lycoan first. Boom, Lycoan, and then here I'm actually going to cancel and then switch back and then totalize. Oh, it is totalize. Holy crap, I actually finally got it right. But that is also another way that you can do it. To be honest, I would forget about that because it's freaking too complicated. However, there are going to be times when you're going to forget and you're going to accidentally go into stun with your Hugo. All right, and so the last case is if we use our second stunner to push them into stun. And this is going to be very common, especially with Lighter, with Qingyi. And so what we need to do is we need to first take Lycoan, and then we need to take Hugo, chain attacks. And then we're going to totalize after that. So let's push him into stun. And then we're going to take Lycoan to get that plus 35%, and then we're going to take Hugo, and then we're going to totalize immediately after with the EX skill. Bada bing, bada boom, 1.4 mil, that's looking pretty good. All right, and so the last thing about all of this is that if you look at the stun gauge, and I haven't touched the boss by the way, immediately after totalize, he actually has a little bit of days left. And so what I'm trying to say is that if we use Hugo to totalize, which is what we're about to do, we're actually going to end up with some residual days. So as you can see, totalize, and then 25 days left. Just think of it like a tax refund. All right, and so for most of this segment, we talked about Lighter and Lycoan, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that most of you are probably not going to have Lighter. Actually, if you did pull for Hugo, you're probably going to have Lighter. But anyway, I want to talk about some of the other stunners. The most interesting being Qingyi. And the reason that Qingyi is so interesting is because, and let's just use like, for example, Hugo, Lycoan, and Qingyi. It's interesting because this is probably the only team where you want to spend the majority of the time in Qingyi. And so absolutely make sure that Lycoan's buffs are up, throw in that EX skill, and make sure that he is the one that pushes the enemy into stun. But then what's going to happen is that we're actually going to main field Qingyi most of the time because we want to build the stun multiplier with her. Now, what is going to end up happening though is Qingyi will most likely be used to push the enemy into stun because she just stuns like freaking crazy, right? And so again, my degens, when this happens, and it will happen a lot, you just need to take the first chain with Lycoan and then second chain with Hugo, cancel the chain, and then totalize. Big damage. Now, on the other hand, let's take Hugo, trigger, Lycoan. Now, conceptually, this is going to be very similar to our first team. However, in this case, we're going to use trigger periodically, sometimes to use the E skill or ult or whatever, but we're going to spend most of our time inside of the furry. And then as always with Lycoan, we're going to throw an EX here and there, and then use him to push the enemy into stun. After doing that, we take the Hugo chain to get that crit buff, chain cancel, and then EX skill or ultimate to totalize. And to be honest, I could go on and on and on about the rest of the stunners, Ambi, Pulchra, Collada, but we're really going to be following the same principles, right? We're going to build up stun, and along the way, we're going to make sure all of our buffs are up, and then we're going to blow the big load. Easy. All right, and so in that case, I want to talk about a few other things. And the first is stats, in particular, crit. The first thing is to remember that for Totalize, we will always have this massive crit rate and crit damage buff, 12%. And so what that means is that we should always will never see crit rate of above 88% to make sure that we don't overcap. Now, that being said, Totalize. This guy is where the majority of the damage is going to be. Hugo Vlad is truly like that burst attacker. And where I'm going with this is that if this thing does not crit, it's freaking over, right? And so it's really important for you to have your crit rate, including buffs, to be as close to 100% as possible. So as you can see over here, with the buff, the 12% crit rate buff, my Hugo will have 92% crit rate. I would prefer that to be more like 95, 98, but this is pretty much what we're looking for. And then in terms of dig choices, there are two sets which may seem logical, which aren't that good. And the first is Polar Metal. This isn't good because it increases basic and dash attacks, which our Hugo is not going to do very much of. And the other is Branch and Blade Song, in which this is actually really freaking good, but to get the Anomaly Mastery requirement of 115, you have to sacrifice a shit ton of stats. And to be quite frank, I actually tried it. You can only achieve it by using Phython's Melody. You have to sacrifice a 2-piece for Anomaly Mastery from this guy, as well as using AM for your Disc 6. It just wasn't worth it because you're losing so many stats. And so what I would actually recommend are our classic Hormone Punk and Woodpecker Electro. Between these two, I actually prefer Hormone Punk here. And yes, it is more strict because we have to stay off of Hugo until we actually get to the stun window. However, when we make it, we're gonna get the big juice, and he's gonna come out plus 25% attack, Totalize, and chunk their balls off. On the other hand, with Woodpecker Electro, this guy requires you to manage a little bit more buffs, which isn't a problem. You just need to make sure that you're going to do a basic attack, a dodge counter, and an EX attack like every so often. 6-second buff kind of thing. This kind of set is a lot better for like main fielders who want to stay on the field for a long time, who can actually pull all three of these off constantly. What I will say is that Hugo is absolutely the epitome of burst DPS. Swap in, do big damage, and swap out. And so it's for that reason, just to align with the playstyle, I would recommend Hormone Punk because it pretty much is exactly that playstyle versus the Woodpecker Electro, which is again more main on fielder. And lastly, let's talk W engines. So of course, his signature is going to be the best. You can see the big crit rate and big crit damage. And of course, if for nothing else than a stat stick, you can absolutely use your Deep Sea Visitor, the Ellen signature. However, for you Povo people like me, we're going to be going back to Marcato. All roads lead back to Marcato always. This bad boy just has way too much going for it. We've got 20% crit rate at max, and then on top of that, we've got the chain attack as well as the EX skill, giving us more attack. But like this bad boy, holy crap, is truly our golden savior. All right, my DGens, with that, that's pretty much it. Let me know if you guys pulled for Hugo. And as always, if there was anything that I missed or just blatantly got wrong, please let us know down in the comments below. We would all appreciate it. But otherwise, team, this is the end. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.